Welcome to the podcast, Blind Faith, a podcast that's exploring faith and blindness and just how they interact. My name is Mark Madavan, and it's my privilege to be the host of this podcast brought to us by Torch Trust for the Blind. In each episode, I'm speaking to a different person who has some encounter of blindness, and we're just, again, exploring faith and blindness. And my guest in this episode is Sheila Armstrong and her lovely guide dog, Peach. So welcome to this podcast, Sheila.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. So I said each podcast we're chatting to people about blindness. And so what's your relationship with blindness? How does blindness impact your life?
Well, I was born blind, so I've never known anything else. I can see light and dark. The reason it happened, a recessive gene just sort of popped up, and I have got my retina and my optic nerve didn't form properly. So my optic nerve can't send images back to my brain. So that's about the size of it, really. So I've never really known anything different from what I have now.
So is your sight now the same as it was when you were a little kid?
Well, I think so, but I've lived a few years, so as far as I'm aware, it's the same. Yeah, I haven't noticed any differences.
What would you say has stretched you or surprised you, or what about blindness do you find the most amusing or challenging? You can go whichever route you want.
Well, it's difficult to say, really. I mean, some of the things people say to you. I mean, I get asked, "Can your dog see when the traffic lights change?" You know, that kind of thing. That's quite amusing. No, they don't do that. They can't do that. Actually, dogs' vision isn't all that good, but they use what they've got: sense of smell, hearing, the vision they do have, and they're able to guide us. So I haven't had a guide dog all my life. I didn't get one till I was 40. I thought, well, life begins at 40. I think I'll do something a bit drastic. So I got a guide dog.
Has that, because I'm registered blind. I haven't gone down the guide dog route.
No.
And so I asked really dumb questions as well. Is, when they're not on the special harness, how do you treat them? And someone said, well, like a normal dog.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
I do expect her to behave herself, but within reason. They are just normal dogs. They're not angels. They're never not naughty, if you know.
That's funny. How you said you got your first guide dog when you were 40.
Yeah.
What difference did that make to your life?
Well, it made a lot of difference because up to that time I used a long cane, and I still can use a long cane. Obviously, if Peach wasn't well, I wouldn't make her work for me. Or if there was some reason why she couldn't be with me, I wouldn't, So you have to have, you can't just rely on one type of getting around. So I did use a long cane and still would if she couldn't take me. But if you're walking with a dog, it's a lot more relaxing. The dog's job is to keep you from walking into things and keep you in a straight line. I can't walk in a straight line without a cane or a guide dog. I can't see the ground. I can't, I've got no reference points, especially in wide open spaces. So the dog's job is to keep you on the straight and narrow, and your job is to navigate. So you do need to know where you're going. So this idea that you just put the harness on, set off, and the guide dog knows where to take you, it's a lot of nonsense, really.
Well, I guess that's stuff you learn and train, because I think often people think, you're blind or you're partially sighted, and you should just know how guide dogs work, or you should know how canes work, and that's not been my experience.
No, definitely not. You need a lot of training. I was trained. I went to a boarding school for blind children in Edinburgh, and quite shortly before I was going to leave, they got a mobility instructor, and this was a new thing to learn the long cane, because before that time we just banged against the walls on the pavements with cymbal canes. They were a lot shorter. They weren't nearly so safe because the long cane, you sweep it in front of you, so if anything's in the way, the cane should hit it first. But the other method we used was definitely unsafe. And so when we got the long cane training, I think it started in America, and of course it gradually came over to Britain, to the UK, as things do from America. And it has made a difference to blind people, because you can get around more. If you use it properly, you can get around safely.
I think mobility is a key thing. What other areas in your life are you aware of blindness impacting and having to think a bit more about?
I'd say nearly everything. At home, I do the cooking, I do ironing, washing, putting the clothes out in the line, but everything takes a lot longer. So if somebody can do something in 5 minutes, it might take me 15 or 20. It depends what it is. And I'm always looking for faster ways of doing things. But you have to allow a lot more time, and I think because you're trying to remember where things are, you can't just look round at a glance and see where you put something. I think your brain gets tired with just remembering everything, so I think it is quite tiring in a way to be a blind person, and in the sense that you have to be concentrating a lot of the time more, than maybe people would relax and just look round, see what was going on. You have to be a lot aware of your environment a lot, I think.
I think there's some really good things you just touched on there. And just for if any of our listeners are new to blindness or trying to understand it a bit more, I think that fact that you said things just take longer.
Mm,
And that's for us as blind people to realize that, we sometimes
mm,
we get frustrated with ourselves. I should do this quicker. And you're going,
yeah.
well, you're blind. Of course, you're not doing it quicker.
Mm,
But
mm,
also other people wanting you to hurry up. And the truth is, it's not that you're incompetent. It's just, I
mm.
can't see what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've been able to see a bit more than you can now, so you'll have had to adapt to that a lot more. I've had plenty of time to think about it as having the same level of sight for the whole of my life. But yeah, it is difficult, and I think people do get frustrated, and especially if they're new to somebody being blind, or somebody's sight is dropping down. My husband's sight's dropping down a bit. He was partially sighted, and he could do quite a lot when we first got married, and he still can, but he's finding it more of a struggle now, and I'm having to start to teach him safer ways of doing things.
Okay. I want to, okay, it's just me and you here. Do you ever get frustrated with him and his losing his sight?
Not really, but I sometimes get frustrated with him for not trying things a bit more than he would,
See, that's
because I think, you know what? You can see a lot more than me. Why are you not gonna do this? So I can get frustrated with that sort of thing sometimes, but, we get frustrated
oh,
with each other. He can get frustrated with me about other things, so
absolutely. I'm not saying this because he's bad or anything. It's just
No,
it's just
no.
trying to it's trying to say, look, this is normal. I think
Yeah,
to take longer is normal. To get a bit frustrated, gets come
yeah,
on, do something.
yeah.
And I think one of the other things that definitely with myself with the frustration is I do get tired because
You
you're
do.
having to work, you have to think
Yeah,
all the time to
that's
do
right.
really basic things.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, having, people in your house like this, by the time tonight comes, you're gonna be shattered just with sheer concentration of doing it all day.
I think that's a really good observation. And because I think it's some people who are losing the sight and stuff is you try harder and you work harder and you're tireder and to
Yeah,
say, but that's normal.
it is
It's
normal.
and to give
Yeah.
yourself a bit of a break with that. So
Yeah, you do have to be kind to yourself, and, sometimes I'll just say to Robert, "I've had enough, I'm going to bed," and that's the end of it, and I'll sleep the whole night, Yeah, you've gotta know when you've reached your limit, really, I think.
and I think
Yeah,
that's really important, and not to feel that you're failing or not to
yeah,
feel that you're just going,
yeah,
I just do need to unplug now.
yeah, I've finished. Yeah.
How long did it take for you to learn that, to realize that along your few years of life?
Mm.
When did I'm guessing like
I
when you're
think
gone.
as I grew into adulthood, I was at boarding school with blind children, so being blind wasn't a big deal. Everyone was blind. I mean, some had a bit more sight than others. Obviously, there are different eye conditions that give different levels of sight loss, but we were all basically blind. So being blind wasn't an excuse not to do anything. But we all were in the same kind of boat. But once I stepped out of school and into the ordinary world, I became a lot more aware of it. So I went to university in Edinburgh, and then I started working for Torch Trust after I finished that. So I came down to England when I was 21 and started working, and I continued to work at Torch for the rest of my working life, which I know is really unusual these days, but that's what I did. I felt that's what God had called me to do.
Wind back a little bit. So you
Mhm.
you you work for Tor Is that your job now? What do you
Well, I'm nearly 70, so
okay, was that
it
your
was about time that younger people were doing the job, don't you think?
so what was your job with Torch Trust?
Well, I had different jobs. I didn't do the same thing. So when I first arrived, there was a lot of manual labour in typing and brailing to be done. Uh, but when computers came in, some of that wasn't needed. So after a while, I started looking after the transcribers, the people who were doing books, converting books from print into braille and large print. I can't read large print myself, but we use the same files and still do with modifications for Braille and large print, and I understood, how that worked. So I looked after the volunteers, and somebody who could see worked with me. So anything they would write down in print, handwriting, any comments they made or any corrections they made, we worked out a way of doing that. So once we were working on computer, that's the way we did things, and they still do. But nowadays Torch gets most of its files from publishers, so they don't
Yeah.
even have to create the file, which is really good.
It's great. I mean, I think
Saves a lot of labor. It really does.
absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the great things that Torch does is to move
Yeah.
written word into different varied
Yeah.
medias.
And
And
then after that, I ran client services for a little while. That's our help desk, basically our help desk, where people can phone in and ask for things. And that was quite a challenge because some of the computer systems were I had to constantly look for faster ways of doing working on the computer. And and then after that, I produced a reflections program, which also results in a podcast after it's gone out on the RNIB's radio station called Royal National Institute for the Blind. That is RNIB Connect Radio. They've got a radio station, and the program that I don't produce it now. That was my last job, so I handed that over to somebody else when I retired from working at Torch. But that program goes out at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and it's the only Christian input that I'm aware of on that radio station.
wow, there's some great stuff that Torch does, and it's amazing to hear someone who's been involved with it for many years.
Mm.
Y- Was this your? Because I think your first contact with Torch Trust was on a holiday club. Is that right?
My first contact with Torch was really magazines that they produced were sent into the blind school. And they just got a bulk order, probably about half a dozen, because we did have some Christian staff in there, and they must have ordered these magazines, and they were just left for us to pick up and read, and they were just lying about. And that was the first time I really became aware of Torch. And then uh, there was somebody who was really keen on starting local groups all around the country, and one started up in Edinburgh. So quite a few of us in the school had become Christians, and I know that that was largely, or you know, really due to a lot of staff who were Christians. There were two or three of them. They must have really been praying for us because about half a dozen of us really became Christians round about the same time as we went through senior school. And some of us went along to this local group. Well, of course, most of the folks there were elderly, like more that the age I am now, and older. And so I think we probably brightened up their lives a little bit. A young element from the blind school coming into the group, and so that's really how I got involved in Torch. And then, of course, Torch had conferences for the local groups, so they would send down a couple of reps. So I wanted to see what this place was like. So I managed to persuade them to send me down with somebody else, and that's when I first saw saw a bit of Torch. And then, of course, I was at university and we had really long holidays. And at home, my parents lived in Caithness at the time, near John O'Groats. There wasn't a lot to do up there, so I asked if I could volunteer to help for a little while for 9 weeks of the holidays. And that was really good fun. I don't know how much help I was, but I had a lot of good fun at Torch.
That's what confused when you said you helped in your holidays. I just put together holiday club.
Well, you see,
That's why. Okay.
we did have house parties, but I was just part of the 9 week stint that I was there. I
Does Torch
joined in with
Trust?
them.
Sorry to interrupt. Does Torch Trust still do things like that with local groups and holiday
Well,
house parties?
there aren't so many local groups now because I think there's a general trend that people don't like to meet in groups so much. I suppose social media has got something to do with it because people feel that need of connection through their social media, maybe more than, well, obviously we didn't have it then. There wasn't such a thing. So I think a lot of people are finding that there's not so many perhaps face-to-face groups. So at its peak, there were about 150, but there's only 30 odd now left that are still running. And also, of course, it makes a big difference if the leadership is able to hand it over to younger people.
Yeah.
Just, if that doesn't happen, the group tended to close. So, and the holidays, well, we used to have a country house in a village called Hallerton, and that's where, a lot of us stayed when we were younger. Um, so there was tied accommodation to the job, as it were, and we were able to run holidays there. And then we had another holiday centre in the south of England, but all that's they Hallerton. We moved to Market Harbour because the way the work was going, it needed a proper office. And, the walls in this old country house were so thick you couldn't Wi-Fi, and it was just, it was just hopeless trying to modernise. And it was getting expensive to keep the place up because, more and more things started going wrong in an old house.
So,
Yes.
I mean, there's some amazing history and things that we're
Yeah.
involved with.
Yeah.
I know moving forward, Torch Trust is still
Mm.
trying to connect people and to
Oh, yes.
signpost them.
Yes,
A-
definitely.
and
Yeah.
although we are in a different era, there's still, I
Yeah.
think, some of our basic needs we still need to connect, don't
We
we?
do. We
And
do. Yeah, we
um,
do.
you mentioned earlier that you came to faith through what Torch Trust is. So how does your blindness and faith link in? Where does God and your faith in Jesus fit into your blindness? How does that
Well,
interact?
actually, I became a Christian at school more through. I was already a Christian when I knew about Torch, and it was through a sighted house mother, a lady who was looking after us, who was a Christian, and she used to run a Christian uh, a scripture union for us, and we could go along. And she taught us the choruses, and we had to say our memory verses. And if you could say 8 weeks in a row, if you could say your memory verse, you got a badge. So that was a bit of an incentive. And then she would take us out to other scripture union gatherings in Edinburgh, and that was great because it got us out of the school, which we really wanted. So her encouragement, and I know other staff that prayed as well. I think that's why so many of us came to the Lord at that time and all together, kind of thing. So I was already a Christian when I found out about Torch, and my longing was to serve the Lord. And I found that in churches, a lot of things really seem to require sight, unless you were a pastor like yourself. Obviously I wasn't going to do that. And I couldn't find ways of serving the Lord really in church. And I found that through Torch there might be an opportunity for that. So that's what first drew me to it, when I saw that blind and sighted Christians were working together to reach out the good news about Jesus.
And I think one thing that's just striking me about you sharing some of your different job stuff is I think sometimes people think blindness is that big restrictor, and it is a
Mm.
restrictor in
Oh
some
yeah,
ways, but it
yeah.
doesn't mean you can't do things.
No.
Do you see blindness as a restricting thing or as a moving an opportunity thing? How do you view blindness?
Well, I think it can be both actually. It is, obviously. I mean, we can't pretend it is restricting. The whole swathe of visual stuff is cut out from you. Family passing around photographs, having a laugh about things they can see. A lot of stuff is cut out. I have a brother and sister, and they're both sighted, which is great. They didn't get my recessive gene, thank goodness. But some of the things they've done have been, cut out for me. Not deliberately. It's
No, no,
just it's
absolutely.
just how life goes,
Yeah.
and you can't deny that it is restrictive. But on the other hand, there can be plus sides, and I found, especially since I became a Christian, because you asked about blindness and faith, but to be honest, when I came to the Lord in the blind school, blindness just wasn't an issue because, as I've already said, we were all blind. So, you know, it wasn't like it didn't really come into the equation. It was whether we should follow Jesus or not was the same question that everyone has to ask, and the blindness didn't wasn't really a factor at that time, about whether we should become Christians or not.
Yeah, no,
You
it's
know,
fascinating. If I'm asking all my guests is if you were to meet the young you, so say late teens, early 20s,
Mm.
is there a piece of advice about blindness or faith or something about life that you would share you wish your younger self would say?
Well, just don't get wound up about things. If people misunderstand you, let it float over you. Because you get a lot of things people say to you when you're out and about. When I'm out and about with Peach, or I've been out and about with the long cane. I mean, some of the intrusive questions people ask you, I used to get really angry, but the Lord's helped me to just, let it float over me. So I'd say, try to let what people say to you float over you. It's not out of badness; they just don't understand. They just can't imagine. So obviously, if somebody sees you going about as a blind person, they think to themselves, "Well, if I lost my sight, I couldn't do anything." And that's where people come from when they say things to you about your blindness.
I think that's really useful. I've thought that as well is when people say something, it's not that they don't know what to say, and they often say silly things not because they're mean, it's just because they haven't really thought about it.
Yeah, and they think, "Well, if I was in that position, I couldn't do anything. So why are they able to do anything?" you
No,
know.
absolutely. Sheila, it's been a real delight to hear some of your story and your connection, especially with Torch Trust and all the things that they have done. And also, I'm excited about some of the new things that they're doing as well, and
Mm,
encourage people to connect up with them to discover, because they're still seeking to connect and
absolutely.
help people. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Peach, for being so quiet. And thank you for listening, and hopefully speak to you again.
If you are living with sight loss or support someone who is, then Torch is here for you. Get in touch at torchtrust.org.